Right now, officially, we can get started. My name is Sylwia Chutnik. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be part of the Big Book Festival and to be part of one of the sessions. It's a special edition because it's a hybrid event in the sense that some of you are here, I'm here, I can see your faces, but also covered by masks, so I can't see your emotions reflected in your faces. And there's a lot of people. Well, normally people who come to this festival come here physically, but we have lots of people listening to us, to our streaming service, so hopefully the internet will work for us, and we have this opportunity to talk to authors, writers from all over the world. We don't have them here in person, but still, we're very happy that despite this difficult situation, difficult circumstances, we can somehow meet and talk to one another. I will be speaking Polish. The author, she's Swedish. She's going to speak to us in English. Those of you who would like to hear interpretation, we will have interpretation from Karolina Więckowska and Joanna Zaorska. I would like to thank them for their work as simultaneous interpreters. So this meeting will take 1 hour and 15 minutes. At one point, I will give the microphone to you, so we will be able to give you an opportunity to raise your hands like at school, and this way you'll be able to ask questions and make comments. I would like to welcome again those of you who are looking at us through their computer screens and mobile devices screens. There is a chat function, so you can jump in, you can ask questions. At one point I will get your questions asked via chat, and I'll be able to read them out loud and ask them to our author. We're meeting and we're talking about a topic that's very, very difficult. The red color behind the logotype, the poster, the red color of Big Book Festival. The red color is about love and passion, but actually the topic that we're going to talk about in the coming hour or so, it's not about love or tenderness. It's more about harassment. The scandal that happened several years ago and the Me Too hashtag. But actually, thanks to our author, the Swedish Academy will never be the same. Matilda Voss Gustavsson is the author of the book called The Club. This is the premiere launch. You'll be able to buy this book now downstairs, even though it's going to premiere officially only in September, translated by Madame Czechowska. So this book is all about how it happened that this sexual scandal was brought to light and how it resonated and why it resonated and reverberated across the whole of Sweden. And it was part of a global voice about the rights of women, about sexual harassment and how rights of women are violated. Matilda, in November 2017, in the newspaper Dagens Nyheter, where she works, she presented a number of interviews and features about the sex scandal in the context of a very powerful cultural institution that the Forum Club had been for years. It was run by Katarina Frostenson, a very renowned poet, together with her husband, Jean-Claude Arnault. And actually this whole story is all about him, all about this man and his secret that Matilda came to uncover with a lot of skill and aptitude. When we connect with her, we will learn about how she discovered this dark secret and how she made sure that this secret was exposed in a big newspaper, in a big magazine, thus affecting or joining in the debate in the conversation about sexual harassment of women. Matilda, welcome. Good afternoon. We are very happy to have you with us. We are very happy to have you with us, even though the situation is quite peculiar. And we are hoping that one day you will come to Poland, and we're hoping that we'll be able to simply see you in person. But still, we're very happy that you're part of this festival. And I have to admit that from the very beginning, when I was getting ready to talk to you, it was supposed to be about a book, but actually it's not only about a book, it's about a big political and social phenomenon, part of a huge social change and how women are emancipating themselves, and about the Me Too movement, Me Too campaign, what it actually initiated, a huge public debate about the situation of women, but not only, also about how we talk about the circumstances of women, our language, our habits. And also, it's all about social changes, even political changes, as you are saying in your book. So let me start from the very beginning, I guess. So from the moment when the sex scandal of Harvey Weinstein the news first broke out, when journalists from the New York Times published a number of stories about what was happening in Hollywood. And you, as a reporter, as a journalist, at that point you were wondering whether a similar persona could exist in Sweden. What did you feel at that time? What were you thinking at that time? What was your thinking?
First of all, I'm so happy to be a part of this, even if it's from a distance in Stockholm. Yeah, I remember when the Harvey Weinstein story broke. I think journalists all over the world, they started to think, could something similar happen here in my country? And my first answer to that question was no, it couldn't happen here in Sweden for many reasons. I mean, we are such a small country, and if you think about the cultural sphere, everybody knows each other, or at least knows of each other. And I felt that we didn't have the same economic structure. In Hollywood, you have so much money, and the possibilities for failure or success is much bigger. I'm sorry, I hear myself a bit. But when, as a response to my no, I came to think of Jean-Claude Arnault, and I had heard rumors of him for 10 years, and it's been in the back of my mind that I wanted to write something about him and about the sphere around him and his connections to the Swedish Academy, because when I was only 20 and I lived in a small town in Sweden and I wanted to be a writer myself, I heard from a friend, and he had moved to Stockholm and he came back and he told me about this place, this rough basement in the central part of Stockholm where everybody from the cultural sphere gathered. The greatest artists, writers, members of the Swedish Academy. It was like their living room. And I remember that I was very tempted by this, a bit jealous of him for being a part of it, but also at the same time repelled, because he described that Jean-Claude Arnault, the artistic director of this place, he touched his female assistants extremely, inappropriately. He harassed them, even though I never used that word back then. And he did this in public. And since then, I've been thinking about this place and this part of the cultural scene, and that I wanted to write something about it. But it was a very vague idea. And I think something happened with Harvey Weinstein when that story broke, because suddenly my vague idea became crystal clear. And the question was, could there be any truth to the rumors of Jean-Claude Arnault? And I think also the Weinstein story gave me a very hands-on example of how to do it and show that it was possible to investigate a person like that.
I believe that this conspiracy of silence that for many years had been going on in Hollywood, in the Forum Club, in the basement that you've just mentioned, I think it was one of the sort of blockages, some of the things that made it impossible to know the truth and to listen to the voices of the victims. So let's talk about this mysterious club that made it possible for this conspiracy of silence to continue for decades. What kind of structure was it? And what about the character, the main character? What was his role in it?
I'd say his role is very much depending on powerful people around him. He is an interesting person, and I'm trying to portray him in my book as a human being. He's actually an electrician from Marseille, doesn't have like a higher education, but he has a lot of ambition, and he came to Sweden and he wanted to be an artist himself, and he was never seen as maybe not talented enough, but he really wanted to be recognized as an artist or an intellectual. Instead, his recognition was that he became close friends with main figures in the cultural sphere, and they will later become key members of the Swedish Academy. And he also married the greatest poet in Sweden, Matilda Voss Gustavsson, also a member of the Swedish Academy. And he founded this club in a basement in Stockholm, and it was became a very important scene. If you wanted to be recognized, if you wanted to be published, I mean, it was seen as an extreme honor to be allowed to perform at the stage there. And so it was like they had amazing performances for many years down there. And his power is, I mean, he was a really, I mean, I would say he was a really talented social player. And he realized how the art world, how it worked, and how power worked in the cultural sphere. For example, that it's the structure of power, it's very vague, and it's not it's hard to navigate, especially if you're young and if you're new in like literature, because people's power positions are not always based on having a boss title, or it's not even based on making a lot of money. It's more about having connections and status and reputations and being invited to parties. So it's extremely hard to navigate. And Jean-Claude Arnault, he used this to exaggerate his power. I mean, he had power mainly thanks to his close ties to the Swedish Academy, but he also exaggerated and presented himself as a gatekeeper, someone who could make or break a young person's career. And if you were not very well established yourself, if you were young, it was extremely hard to know whether that was true or not. And there's also, if we're talking about him as a person, there's this very dark irony that he knew something about the vulnerability in wanting to be a writer, especially if you don't have that kind of background at all. If you come from a working class family like he did, and when he got his power position, he preyed on women in that situation, women with extreme creative ambitions.
Right. The way I read your book was exactly as a story of a hierarchy that was very transparent, saying that it's not very formal. The world of art is like no man's land. This means that there were no clear distinctions of roles and responsibilities. You don't know exactly who the king or the queen was. Some people had outright power, but some people didn't have outright power, but they have had a different kind of power. It's all very discretional. So there's a certain paradox. To become an artist, whether male or a female, you want to go to Paris. And this time, a Parisian came to Stockholm. But tell us, at the point when you started working on a book, when you stopped working on a feature story, on a book, you have to reach those potential victims. At that point, you said there had only been rumors, nothing more than rumors, about possible sexual harassment. So how did you find those potential victims, and how those first victims reacted, and how they came to talking about what had happened to them?
That was hard in the beginning. Where to start? I started to quietly reach out to people in the cultural scene that I knew, or maybe that I had interviewed before in my job. And so I started to, talk to people about that. I wanted to find out whether there was any truth to the rumors. And I got in touch with women that shared stories of sexual harassment, that it was never an option for them to talk under their real names. But then I think maybe a couple of weeks into my investigation, and I will never forget that moment, because that's when I heard the first rape story, and it was quickly followed by, I got in touch with another woman, shared a rape story, and to me that was like a point of no return, because I started to realize that maybe this was much worse than the rumors, much worse than what he had nicknames in Sweden, like funny nicknames refer to him as being a harasser, but this was much worse. And it was an extremely hard decision for them whether or not to talk on record with me. They were terrified of repercussions of being punished, and the people I talked to back then, they were writers often, or they tried to survive in the literary world. And some of them also so feared for their own safety and their family safety. And I think it would have been impossible to break this story before Me Too, because finally their incentive to talk to me was the Me Too movement, and also that because with the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein, almost for the first time in history, serious accusations against powerful men had consequences for the accused, and not only for the women accusing. And so that was a shift. And they realized that, maybe this could have consequences. Maybe I could prevent there from being any other victims. And so the shift that we now call Me Too, that had started to happen, was often the reason for them to finally be a part of this investigation. And I remember when I was about to publish, and I had 18 women at that time. I remember thinking that this must be only the tip of an iceberg. There must be so many more, considering that I, with my limited circle of contacts, had been able to come across 18 women. And just, in the hours after my story broke, I started to receive emails from women that had that had raped stories as well. And something that I realized was that what they often had in common, the women that contacted me after the story broke, was that they had left the art world, and they had met Jean-Claude Arnault when they were younger, and when they had creative ambitions. And now they worked in other areas. They worked in banks and at hospitals. And often the reason had to do with their experiences with Jean-Claude Arnault and with the culture of silence and the art world's complicity. So, I mean, that's been, to me, that's a part of the crime, that he's not only, this behavior and also the complicity of the cultural sphere has crushed so many dreams. And I think there's a lot of books that have never been written because of this.
The recurrent question in your book, how can we talk about sexual assault, sexual violence, harassment? I understand that in the public sphere, how to talk about the sexual violence. This is a question, actually, how to talk about the sexual violence in public sphere and how to talk with the victims. When you started your work on the in your reports, actually, did you have an idea and a strategy how to talk about these painful things, how to talk to the victims, the heroes of your essays, of your reports?
I actually had no idea, really, more than I knew that I would, even though it was very hard, I would have to work almost as a police investigator in order to publish this. I had to ask them, I had to back up their stories and ask them, did you write about this in your diary? Did you speak to any family member right after he raped you? And do you have plane tickets? You tell me that you told me that you went to Paris with him. Can you show me any tickets? Things like that. But when it comes to talking about these experiences, there are, I think, open questions, and also that we talked several times often. And somehow we often had these conversations over phone, and some of them felt that was easier because they could, go back in time, and they had to relive this in their memories, and that some of them felt that was easier when they couldn't see me, they couldn't see any facial expressions, and I think that created a freedom, and something that was important to them, but also to me, but especially to them, was that their stories should be complex, that we shouldn't simplify them. And I remember, because I was so afraid, that they wouldn't be believed. So in the beginning, I had this impulses of wanting to sometimes simplify things. For example, it's very common, and it's in many of the stories in my book, the victims, they meet Jean-Claude Arnault after the assault. And I remember that I sometimes wanted to, leave that out, and not, I could be afraid of just reality, but that was very important to them, that the story, that their testimonies, it should be true, and they, and I think also that in the end, that was what made their stories very powerful and also believable, because it was true, and it reflected a reality, and it, instead of reflecting, old stereotype narratives of what a rape situation is, and of old pictures of perpetrators as being these monsters. And they also, in their stories, they wanted to describe him as a human being, and also describe why they were attracted to him. And so.
Exactly. It's this. This is the question of believing in the story. You write that the image of the victim is quite a stereotypical one. You assess the value of the woman, her honor, her value, and you ask the question: what the victim should behave to be believed? Often we actually assess or evaluate certain beliefs. We evaluate things from the perspective of morality. And this is this trap of stereotypes, cliches, that you can be trapped easily. Did you also notice that you as women also were trapped in such situation when sooner or later your evaluation system somehow switched on and you followed your evaluations?
You mean in my personal life, or in my
vis-a-vis people you talked to? Were you trying to come up with the stereotypical portrait of a perfect victim, even though it sounds quite brutal, a perfect victim?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was, but they didn't allow that, and I think when I wrote the book, I never hesitated. I wanted it to be more nuanced and rich, and I felt that it was extremely important to just convey the reality of sexual violence and the psychological mechanisms that leads to, I mean, you can understand, all stories are very individual, but I mean, you can see tendencies and in how people react after being assaulted. And sometimes it has to do with stereotypes around the victim and really black and white ideas about, like, if you are a victim or if you have been raped, then you have, like, you've been destroyed for life and you will never be the same again. And I think pictures and ideas like that, to many women, they are prepared to do almost anything to avoid, to acknowledge even to themselves that they have been, I was raped, I was a victim, because that's so terrifying. And some of them, I mean, that's one part of the reason why maybe they're seeing their perpetrator again, because they want to normalize the situation, or they want to gain power. They don't want to give this person give them that they made them a victim. So I also, because it was liberating for me to just write what was true, you know, beyond those stereotypes. It felt important to let it be a part of my book and hopefully be a part of just in general a broader understanding of sexual violence.
Zapytałam o to, ponieważ praca nad Twoimi reportażami to był początek mitu i myślę sobie o tym, jak wygląda krajobraz po tych kilku latach, że jednak jednym z konsekwencji całego ruchu było to, że zaczęłyśmy mówić i szukać języka na to, aby określać ofiary i nie wpadać w te czarno-białe stereotypy. Ale wracając do Twojej pracy, ukazuje się Twój artykuł, na okładce jest 18 bohaterek i co się wtedy dzieje? Czy pamiętasz ten dzień i jaki był rezonans, jeśli chodzi o...
There are your article published. You see 18 victims on the page of the newspaper. And what is actually the outcome? What is the result of the article? What were the reactions?
My fear before publishing the story was silence, that people would maybe read it, maybe react a bit, and then forget it in a couple of days. But that, I mean, what happened was quite the opposite. People reacted extremely strongly. I received so many emails, and something that was quite dramatic in the beginning. Of course, everybody wanted to know, how will the Swedish Academy react? And to me, that was impossible to even to vision before, because in Sweden, the Swedish Academy are so secretive. You know nothing about them, nothing about their inner life. I mean, Sweden is in general a very everything is quite open and it's a very egalitarian and secular country. But the Swedish Academy has been this very interesting exception, and they've been they've been on a pedestal, and they've also been we know nothing about them. So, I mean, that was, to me, an extremely open and hard question, like how will they even react? But I think a couple of days after my story broke, the permanent secretary, the then permanent secretary, Sarah Danius, she came out after their meeting and held a press conference, and she expressed that they wanted to take it extremely serious, and they had hired a law firm to investigate every single Academy member and their ties to Jean-Claude Arnault and what had happened. And also, and this really shocked me and shocked people in Sweden, she said that during their meeting, they had discussed Jean-Claude Arnault, and members of the Academy had, their wives and their daughters had been his victims as well. They had been sexually harassed. So they had this first-hand knowledge about this. And that was shocking, but it was also extremely shocking that she was so open about this. She almost came out and said, she said that we have a responsibility here. I mean, we've been complicit, but also almost saying like, me too, or we too. So that was an unforgettable moment. Then later, it turned out that she didn't had all the Academy members behind her, that there was one part of the Academy, and that were Jean-Claude Arnault's close friends, and that had protected him, very hands-on protected him. They never supported what she did and the way she wanted to take responsibility for what had happened. And this conflict between the two different approaches to the story was what a couple of months later made the Swedish Academy almost fall apart.
This is another important plot in your book. We started with the most important topic, the victims, this invisible hierarchy and the conspiracy of silence. But the consequence of your article, the consequences were very broad, and they reached very high, so to say, because they reached actually the top of the Academy, they reached the king, the royal family. So during this situation that you described, this dynamic situation, the statement of the permanent secretary, this different approach towards the whole situation by the Academy members, what was actually the end of the story? Where are we now today in 2020? What is the end of the story? Did the situation somehow influence the way that Academy worked, the Nobel Committee worked?
That's an interesting question. The end of the Swedish Academy part of the story is, I mean, the situation is much more stable now. But also the Academy is something completely different. So many members have left the institution, and they have the most dramatic and radical changes, that they have lost their reputation and they have lost the public's trust in many ways. And they've been fallen from this pedestal. And before this happened, it was seen, to be a member, to be a part of the Swedish Academy and to be appointed as a new member was seen as an absolute sign of brilliance. So we had the greatest writers and the greatest intellectuals have often been a part of the Academy. And you never turned down an offer to be a part of the Academy. But since they were exposed like this, and since they exposed themselves, they've lost this status, and it's been harder for them to find new members, and people have turned down the offer to be a part of it. So, their reputation have declined and for a long time, and maybe forever. At the same time, I have to say that one reason for their status even before this was the fact that they had all this money, and you could be rewarded financially by the Swedish Academy. And of course, that's in the art world, it's extremely hard to earn a living, and a lot of writers depend on scholarships and grants, and they still have that money. So in that sense, they still have that power.
So what about the wife of the accused, Katarina Frostenson? Is she still a member of the Academy? And what's even more interesting, my question is whether her position, whether her stature as an intellectual, as a poet, has it been somehow tarnished by this scandal? It's really shocking that a woman is not showing solidarity with other women, is not showing an understanding, is actually trying to protect the patriarchy.
Yeah, I think Jean-Claude Arnault is much more, it's easier to understand, I think. To me, she is much more a mystery. And also because she has always chosen that role. She's very rarely given any interviews. And she's an extreme, I think she's I really love her poetry. And in this story, she's a very fascinating character. She's his main protector. And no one who is not her knows whether or not, if she's a victim as well or what's going on. But what we can say is that she is a protector, and also that he's been important for her as a writer, as an author. And I think that the dynamic between them is interesting, and it's also quite unusual because she is very much 100% a poet, and since she's been a member of the Swedish Academy, and she's never had any jobs outside of writing her own poetry. So she's been able to very much live in this bubble of her own writing, and he's been a support in that. And he's had the role, like the typical role that we sometimes call the author's wife, where you clean the apartment and cook and make sure that the genius can focus 100% on her work. And some of the friends close to the couple say that he's also been important for her as an inspiration in many ways. So that they refer to him almost as a muse, and a male muse. I think she's. I don't think her poetry is that affected, actually. Also because she's never been a public figure. She's always been avoiding, being personal or revealing anything about herself. So she's only been known for her poetry, and I think it's been quite traumatic for her to be exposed like this, and people trying to find out details about her actual life. But since she was never a public figure like that before, I think her readers are still extremely open to just see her poetry. And she's writing, and
in your book, you are also talking about the situation sort of that happened as a result of Me Too, where people who are accused are sort of pushed out of the limelight, like movies produced by Weinstein, or films that were directed by Polanski, by Woody Allen. Some pieces of music are sort of being withdrawn from different internet platforms and websites because they were created by people who were accused or convicted of sexual harassment. And you take a very clear statement, and you have a clear opinion about it in your book. So can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, I think that was and that's one reason for me why it's very hard to define or pinpoint what we call Me Too, because it was so much. And some tendencies I was critical of. For example, the canceling of artwork, and some activist groups trying to ban so-called problematic songs or movies made by accused men, and to erase them. And I think that's a dangerous way to go. But at the same time, I think it can be a very important and constructive thing that powerful men that have platforms, their positions are often, a main reason for their abuse, why they can abuse. So I think it can be a way forward that people lose their platforms, but that's not the same thing as erasing their life works. And I've also been critical of, at least in Sweden and also in the US, where accused men have been shamed in a way that, you can almost see like parallels with how we very often shame victims, but where media, write about not only, their crimes, what they have done, and their actions, but also write about their flawed characters, and write about maybe their drug abuse, and maybe even their sexual preferences. And I guess that it could seem like sweet revenge, but shame is a dangerous thing, and it's a really it's never a good starting point for change. So that's, I think, the main tendencies that I've been critical of.
Right. It's been over 3 years since the hashtag, the #MeToo hashtag, has been used. Then there are more. There have been more movements. So apart from shaming, is there anything else that, apart from sort of shaming as a revenge and all the aspects that you find negative, are there any more negative aspects that you see? And what are the biggest accomplishments, constructive things coming out of the #MeToo movement?
There are so many good things coming out of this. I think people in general have much greater awareness of these things. And I mean, we've had this shift in the media, I think, where before 2017, accusations against powerful men, they were published almost in like the gossip section with a picture of a private picture of the women, and it signaled something about, you know, our society, which was that this was not a question we took seriously. And the Harvey Weinstein story and the cover with Bill Cosby, his victims, they were portrayed in black and white. It signaled something, you know, it signaled that this is, you know, worth our time and resources. So I think has changed in the media. And also, I think younger women today have a language for this that I actually never had when I grew up. I remember, I mean, we never talked about sexual harassment or abuse. We just, you know, navigated it and talked about it in other terms. And I think younger people, they have the words, they can use the correct words for what they experience. And also, from what I've heard actually from just teachers in Sweden, is that it's younger women today, they report when they are harassed. And that was never an option for me. I never even thought about it growing up. And actually, I think the fact that Jean-Claude Arnault was convicted, I think it actually shocked me, because I've always had this notion that, you know, you can't get, I mean, there's no justice to be found in going to the police or reporting. And so I think that changed my perception of the justice system, actually, and hopefully not only my perception, but a lot of women's perception, and especially younger generations. And when I just meet or hear about how younger women, you know, can talk about this and have this knowledge, Me Too can actually make me feel old, but in a very positive way, and that's a sign. I mean, it means that it was a shift, and some things that was just, you know, a part of my reality and many people's reality before, it was almost in another era.
Right, so now it's time for you, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience. I see some questions that I've received from our chat function, because our online viewers have submitted a number of questions. So Matilda, I will read one of the first questions. Why Sarah Danius decided to quit, resign from her position? Why wasn't she stopped from leaving? Why didn't anyone try to stop her? Anna Dudka is asking this question.
She was forced to leave. There were these two groups within the Swedish Academy, and the group that was critical of her and critical of her wanting to take this seriously and investigate them, they became a majority, and they, you can say, forced her to leave. So it was, and then, I mean, I guess maybe she could have stayed and fight, but it was, she didn't have any power at that time within the group, because the group that wanted to treat this as they had always treated this, which was to ignore accusations and protect Jean-Claude Arnault. They were stronger.
Right, another question from the same viewer. Have you talked to any witnesses who also had a strong position in the world of culture and who could have talked about the Arnault scandal without risking, because they were already big in the art world? And if you talked to them, did you ask them why you kept silent, even though for you it was no risk because you were already big?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did. And the best example of that is that I interviewed members of the Swedish Academy. And, you know, during their first meeting after my article, they discussed Jean-Claude Arnault, and members said that they had their own experiences of him, that their wives had been harassed or their daughter. And they also discussed, why haven't we talked about this before? I mean, what's our reason? And they were members of the Swedish Academy, so they were extremely established and with, I mean, nothing to lose compared to the victims. And their answers were very, you know, both small and human. And I think they're very common in just any social group, because they were afraid of, they wanted to avoid conflict. They wanted to avoid an awkward atmosphere. And it was just easier to not talk about it than to ignore it. And also, I think if you, for example, if you witness someone being sexually harassed and you don't react, then it's very hard to react the next time, because you slowly become complicit. And after 20 years, it feels impossible to suddenly complain or raise your hand about this. So that was their reason. And it's interesting that the Swedish Academy, that they have always been in Sweden a symbol of something that is, you know, above reality, larger than life. And it's interesting that what happened within that group is a very extremely typical example of just human behavior.
Right. Now, time for you, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, those of you who are here in the room, let's take opportunity of this situation, the fact that we are here with Matilda. If you want to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand and you will get a microphone. A short question. Have there been cases of male artists, who were harassed, abused? Because the 18 victims were all women, right? The ones that you managed to get in touch with, right?
I haven't, not that are victims of being sexually harassed, but there are men that have been threatened for different reasons, and mainly there have been men that have tried to stop Arnaud in different situations, or that have thrown him out of parties because of his behavior. And they've been threatened in the same way as women with, I will make sure that you will never be able to work in this town again. You will never be published. Don't you know who my wife is? So he's been threatening a lot of men, and also threatening with violence, but not when it comes to the sexual crimes.
Anyone else who would like to ask a question? We're waiting for the mic. Justyna Czechowska, who is a translator of a book. Hello. I didn't want to ask Matilda any question, because all the questions I had, actually, I wanted to address Matilda, I did during my translation of the book. But I would like to appeal all of you who are with us here in the room, or who follow us online, please read the book. During actually this conversation with Matilda, I was thinking, during the conversation, this interview of Sylwia and Matilda, I was thinking why I translated the book. I started to work on the book in February, then I made some corrections in spring, and yesterday I got the first copies of the published book, and I'm sure that it's a very important lesson to all of us. So I would like to urge all of you, please read the book to see what we can do about it. Not necessarily, actually, we have to look for the perpetrators in the Polish egalitarian community, art world in Poland. Not necessarily, but we should learn how to recognize certain signals and signs so that we can protect the potential victims or victims to be, those who are not yet victims, but also to help those who have become victims to learn how to name certain things as well, how to call them the names, because this is a book about recognizing some worrying situations and talking about them aloud, stopping this conspiracy of silence. So on top of the book, I would like to recommend a great article, actually, that was written by Emilia Dłużniewska in the Big Magazine, because she, just before pandemic, actually, in the beginning of March, she visited Matilda in Stockholm to interview her. She talked to other people that actually you can recognize for different contexts, like me, Maciej Zaręba-Bielawska and Aneta Player, his wife, who said that actually they were quite a frequent guests in the club, Forum Club, and they also had their thoughts on what happened in Sweden after first after Matilda's article, and then after her book was published. So this was my appeal to all of you. And of course, I would like, I'm sending greetings to Matilda. Thank you very much for this context. Of course, this is a lesson that can be drawn from the book The Club. This actually context is much broader than the whole action of rape or assault. So actually The Club tells about the power, the hierarchy that we are often not aware of. It's like the snowball effect when we keep the conspiracy of silence and we pretend that everything is fine. One of the questions, Matilda, that you ask yourself, in fact, in the beginning on your work on the article, it was a question that actually gave me a lot to think about. If you were the part of this community, if you met these people in person, if you were a frequent guest to the club you are describing, were you be able to, first of all, write about it or to recognize, first of all, the problem, yes? And this is the key issue, I believe, whether, once we are the member of a given community, we tend to say, it's such a good man, he wouldn't be able to do that. We have to collect so much data so that at the end of the day, we are able to talk openly about these difficult problems, difficult issues. Anyone else, ladies and gentlemen, who would like to take floor? Yes, we have 2 other interventions. Just waiting for the microphone. I wanted to ask you about the Nobel Prize. How did the whole situation influence the prestige of the Nobel Prize? Because we talked a lot about the Academy, but I'm also interested in the prestige of the award as such and the future of the Nobel Prize as such.
That's a really good question. And it's hard to answer, actually, because it's, in Sweden, the reputation has declined as a result of, everybody in Sweden, they know about what happened in the Swedish Academy. They know the reason why the 2018 prize was not cancelled, but it was postponed. It wasn't rewarded. But it's, it has a really long tradition, and internationally, people are not that aware of, not even, they know about the Nobel Prize, but they don't know that much about the Swedish Academy, and they definitely don't know that much about the background for the scandal. So right now it's hard to say, but it's still an extremely prestigious prize, of course, with a lot of money, and it still has this unique ability to be, something that everybody in the world follows.
And exactly that was the year where Olga Tokarczuk was supposed to get the Nobel Prize in Literature. Last question now. I have the following question, because the whole event, I imagine, changed your life as well. So my question is, how much your life has been changed by all that? And maybe you have some plans resulting from that fact.
It has changed me in so many ways. And I think mainly because I've learned so much, and from the voices in my book, and not only the voices of, his victims. I'm also talking to friends of Jean-Claude Arnault and just big figures in the cultural sphere, and so I've been in this process of thinking through all these voices for a very long time, and right now I'm back at the newspaper, but I've experienced some, emptiness just from, being without those conversations, and to have, left this story, even though I'm still interested in the questions. But I don't have any plans right now for, another project of this scale. We'll see.
Thank you so much. That was the last question. And this is the end of the meeting with Matilda Voss Gustavsson, the premiere of the club book in Poland already in September. However, already now you can buy the book in Big Book during Big Book Festival. Justyna Czechowska, the translator of the book, was with us. Matilda, thank you so much. Thank you for writing about this topic. Thank you for returning to the topic, discussing all these plots which are so important and which are so important actually in the context of Me Too movement. I would like to thank the audience here with us and following us online. Thank you very much, and we would like to invite you to for next meetings during Big Book Festival. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Dziękujemy.